Good afternoon, everyone. Karasoff would like to welcome you to our UiPath webinar, Delivering Better Student College Experiences Through RPA, the Virginia Precedent. We have multiple speakers today from universities including George Mason University, William and Mary, Virginia Commonwealth University, and Virginia State University. But before we get to those, I would like to introduce Anthony Fung, the CEO and founder of Amplitude 9, who will be kicking off the webinar with a few partner remarks. Anthony, go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to our guest speakers and everyone for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of our speakers and hearing the questions from all of you. Just a couple of things about Amplitude 9. First of all, we're a proud supporter of this webinar and the RPA initiative. We provide RPA and artificial intelligence solutions that improve service delivery, provide significant organizational cost savings, and increase employee productivity and job satisfaction. Amplitude 9 specializes working with the public sector and higher education, which represents most of our clients. We are a UiPath Silver Partner, and our company is accessible through numerous contract vehicles, including BASCUP, GSA Schedule 70, and NASPO Value Point. Please reach out to us after the webinar if you're interested in exploring how to get started on your automation journey, or if you need additional support expanding your RPA program. Let me turn it over to Mark Roselle, Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government. Dean Roselle.
Great. Anthony, thank you. Welcome everyone to the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University. I'm Mark Roselle. I serve as the Dean of the school. And the Schar School is one of 10 schools or colleges of George Mason University. We do government, public policy, international affairs, international commerce, public administration. We have programs undergraduate through master's and PhD offered in both Fairfax and in Arlington, Virginia. But today, I want to welcome you to the kickoff of the 2022 Robotic Process Automation, RPA, Initiative webinar series. And today's webinar focuses on using software automation in higher education and the benefits it brings to students and higher educational institutions. We are joined today by other Virginia universities who are demonstrating by specific examples the use of automation software. And we are pleased and honored to have representatives from William and Mary, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia State University, and of course our own colleagues here at George Mason. So I really hope that this webinar will help other institutions to discover and implement software automation to improve higher education. On behalf of Virginia's entire universities and colleges, therefore, thank you for being with us. And I would now like to turn the program over to the co-founder of the RPA initiative, my colleague, Dr. David Rare. David?
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everybody. I am Dr. David Rare, co-founder of the Robotics Process Automation Initiative here at the Schar School at Mason. Our mission of the initiative is to research, educate, and communicate how the adoption of robotic process automation, we all know as RPA, can improve productivity, operations, and service delivery of public sector organizations. Here's how the webinar will work today. We will have each person talk about their software automation experience. You will also be invited to answer a few poll questions for your CPA credit. I hope you will complete them. They will be posted roughly at the beginning, middle, and end of the program. Once we are complete with all the presentations, we'll take questions. But if you have a question during earlier presentations, please type it in the chat box so they can be addressed and not missed. Our first speaker is Mike Maddalena, Director, Data Science and Business Intelligence, Raymond A. Mason School of Business, College of William and Mary. Mike leads the business intelligence and finance teams. Mike may need to jump off early today, but is going to stay as long as he can. Welcome, Mike. We're delighted you're here, and take it away.
Appreciate that, David. As David said, my name is Mike Maddalena, and I'm the Director of Data Science and Business Intelligence here at the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. And I'm here to kind of talk about how we used RPA for student engagement during COVID-19. So our problem that we were kind of facing when COVID hit and all of our students were sent home mid-semester. Our main concern was that being away from campus, that there would likely be some potential kind of resource constraints that the students in the business school may not be able to adequately engage in online coursework. Some of those constraints were due to kind of lack of high-speed internet or computer resources such as laptops. And so one way that we thought that we could proactively identify these students was that we could run activity reports in Blackboard, as that was where all of our in-person classes were actually being offered, but also went mid-semester to online. They were also being offered in Blackboard. And so we were able to see, using Blackboard, student activity levels kind of by week to try to measure via proxy their student levels of engagement and identify these potential issues. So we just needed to know which professors kind of did not use Blackboard extensively and just kind of held synchronous Zoom sessions to exclude them from this process. There was one problem though. You can only run these reports by course, so only one report per course. Therefore, we knew running it by hand would take a really long time. And so we knew that with over 120 courses offered during that specific semester, we knew that RPA was going to be the best solution there for us. Some pre-RPA challenges that we kind of ran into: we would need a Blackboard admin account that would allow the bot to have access to all of these classes to be able to get in and run these reports. The other issue is we would need students to opt into this program. So we were able to work with our IT department as well as the registrar to get both accomplished. And so once we had the admin account created for those courses, we were pretty much ready to kind of go ahead and develop the bot. And we only had a handful of students that opted out of the actual program, and we were able to exclude them by their student identification number from these reports to respect their wishes as well. So when we actually were cleared to create the bot we developed went into each course offered and executed a report for the date range specified by passing the start and end date range into the URL in the actual Blackboard report. And then so once the report was run, it the RPA bot exported a flat file and imported it into an Access database. And then finally, the bot would update our Tableau dashboard and post it to our permission-based SharePoint site that allowed the programs teams to monitor for low Blackboard activity. Since this process was automated with RPA, it meant we could run it frequent enough to proactively identify these students that would be potentially at risk. And so that kind of gave us an advantage that running it manually just wouldn't be able to kind of provide us. And this is just a quick schematic on what the bot process looked like. Kind of our final outcomes and benefits to the institution as well as students. The benefit to the institution is we were able to identify specific students in specific classes that look to be having engagement issues. This was advantageous for our program teams because they were able to focus on their efforts in specific cases instead of casting a wide net and just individually emailing students and expecting them to be truthful on their challenges. The benefit to the students were that we were able to proactively identify these at-risk students and reach out to them to see if there's any ways that we could help them overcome these resource constraints. We were able to lend about 15 students laptops, as well as work with faculty to see if we can establish asynchronous class sessions for people that had challenges getting to high-speed internet. Some challenges to the implementations. One was single sign-on, and we kind of had to live with this challenge. Our single sign-on requires us to re-authenticate every 14 days. It wasn't a big deal, but we just needed to be on a lookout to make sure that the 14 days were not up to re-authenticate for that bot. The other challenge that we ran into was that we wanted to make sure that we were scheduling it off-peak Blackboard hours because we did notice a drop in performance in running the reports. They ran much quicker in the AM for Eastern Standard Time, so around 6 a.m. is when we had them kicking off. Program effectiveness and cost savings. We were able to pull activity for over 120 courses and update our dashboard. We estimated that would take about approximately 1,000 hours to do the same by hand, and that's just running it once a week. So we estimate at 1,000 hours, we're approximately saving half a FTE doing this RPA process. And the final outcome, we were between laptops and asynchronous kind of work or course deliveries. We were able to identify over students that had resource constraints that we probably would have not been able to identify without using this process. So that's kind of how we leveraged RPA to do it. These are just quick screenshots on the engagement tracker, everything redacted on the student information, but essentially they would show your course activity by hours and things like that, and it would identify any courses that potentially had low activity in them, and then also kind of broke them out by student. And so that's pretty much our on how we leveraged RPA. So any questions? And I don't know if we can wait till the end, David, there on that, but I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, and Mike, let me just ask this question. What was the students' response to all this? I mean, did they tell you guys, this is great, it's really helping us? Did you get any testimonials from some of the students?
Yeah, the ones that it really helped out with, they were very appreciative of it. They felt like it was a very kind of inclusive way of going about doing it. The only kind of negative feedback we got were the folks that opted out. They just didn't want to be tracked. I think it went along with much of the sentiment with a lot of social media tracking everything. So that was kind of the only negative at the beginning, but the outcomes from it were definitely very positive, and inclusivity kind of was the main theme that was brought up from those students, that they appreciated that instead of being reached out to and called out individually.
Well, that's great. We'll probably come back to you with some more questions, Mike, but thanks so much. We will now take a moment or two to go to our first poll survey question and then jump back to the presenters.
David, there is a question for Mike in the chat if you want to address that real quick as well.
Okay.
As long as we got him here.
Yeah. Hey, Dornan, can you get that? Because I can't get it up on my computer at my end.
I can ask it real quick.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mike, one of our panelists asked, what were the major challenges during the planning to the implement stages?
I think since it was one of the more systematic RPA processes that usually in RPA, you're taking a process that exists and transforming it from a manual an operational process to one that we're essentially turning into a technical solution. This process didn't exist. And so the main challenge here was actually creating the process by hand and then transforming it into a technical solution. So we kind of jumped over the operational component of it. So certain things that weren't necessarily obvious actually were the easiest way to actually run the reports were passing parameters right to the Blackboard URL by using the course identification number. And so there's just little things like that, that if it was done kind of by hand previously to this, that you would have caught. So you know, in a certain sense, certain things were kind of discovered on the fly. And so the planning challenges were you were kind of discovering things as you went instead of having that kind of tribal knowledge of the system before kind of kicking it off. So I would say that was the biggest challenge. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great. And responding to that polling question as well, it looks like we've got a majority of people saying yes, daily and or weekly, that they face doing the same activities repeatedly. So good to have that information.
Well, thank you, Caroline.
Yep.
Next, we're going to be joined by two presenters from George Mason University. Becky Klein, Associate Director, Purchasing Operations, has over 21 years of higher education administration and management experience, including 6+ years at George Mason. Becky is the pilot manager of all purchasing processes, and the pilot RPA for Mason Physical Services are among her responsibilities. Joining Becky is her colleague, Brandon Winfield. Brandon is the office coordinator for purchasing and accounts payable department. He is a graduate of Mason, way to go, and he is intimately involved in the workings of RPA. So I'll throw it over to you guys.
Hi, thank you everybody for inviting us and giving us yet another opportunity to share the fact that we had the initial pilot here of RPA for Mason Fiscal Services. Brandon, you want to share a slide here? So Mason's where we started was that Mason's Fiscal Services had been contemplating starting somewhere with using RPA. We had actually had opportunities at other conferences that we had attended where other Virginia University financial institutions was already using RPA, and we could see that it was worth investigating for our own use. So Fiscal Services worked with the ITS Program Management Office, and they proposed one project to be selected from 3 projects to be the initial pilot. So purchasing, student accounts, and general accounting all created a proposal, and each group met with ITS to determine which project would be selected for the pilot. Since I already have experience bridging that gap by doing process improvement for purchasing an AP, I actually reached out to the PMO office and said, listen, what's the criteria that you really are looking for, so that I could review all the processes that we have in place to see which one would possibly apply. So, and in addition to that, Fiscal Services senior leadership wanted to ease people's, and I'm talking about the staff's, feelings about what the real purposes were for RPA. So they actually, in an all hands meeting with staff, actually, we held a little seminar just talking about the adoption of this technology. We didn't want people to feel like they were just going to bring in a bunch of bots and replace the human interaction. Instead, it would be more for use of those mundane and really tasks that, you know, that has to be done on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please, Brandon. So here is the criteria that we were given, the UiPath criteria. They wanted us for the first initial RPA to pick something that's between a low and a medium complexity. It talks about, you know, the number of applications that it touches, the number of potential fields or screens or just various scenarios. And so I reviewed this criteria and I decided that I would pick our vendor submission to the Cardinal vendor group via web portal was the right one. So after ITS reviewed all 3 proposals, our Cardinal vendor submission project was the one that was selected, and we created our working group. And so our working group consisted of my colleague Brandon. We worked with the Amplitude 9 people, and of course, we had consultants from ITS. Next slide, Brandon. So when we're going to talk about, you know, our design and implementation, first we had to look at, as Mike had alluded to before, about how you have to take a manual process and you have to convert it into, you know, a technical solution. So first we looked at our existing manual business process for how we have to submit vendors to Cardinal. And Cardinal is the financial application that's used by the Commonwealth of Virginia. We actually modified our existing process and did a few tweaks. We used our basic report. It's an Excel report for the bot to use that information from that report to actually fill out the web form. And how that works is we have to, every vendor that we create, and I'm talking about people who want to we're going to pay from Mason, we actually have to mirror that in the Cardinal system for the Commonwealth. So the way they've given that to us, we have to, we do approximately between 50 and 100 vendors a week that we actually create. So they gave us this process where we actually had to fill out the form for one per vendor. And it was painfully, it was a painful process, I have to say. So ITS created a virtual machine and they granted us access. And then the Amplitude 9 architects went to work designing based upon the new business model that we had put into place. There were many different factors that decided on how we were going to create this backend process. Other things to consider when establishing an enterprise-wide process involving RPA is you need a developing security and architecture policies, establish a review committee for RPA development consideration. These are things that we had to talk about, like, okay, so we've done the initial pilot. How are we going to launch pilots or launch other RPAs moving forward? So once we did complete the process, we created a test plan, and Brandon, my colleague, did all the appropriate tests. This was a challenge to us since we didn't have a test environment to work with for the Commonwealth web form. But once we did complete all the testing, we did also put procedures in writing so that we could use it as a training tool in the future. We did have a procedure in place to ensure that nothing was submitted in error during our test phase. So that way nothing got submitted to the Commonwealth that wasn't supposed to. So like I said, we developed a written procedure guide. We trained other staff. And I would say it only took us about 6 months from start to finish to completely roll out this RPA to our production environment. Next slide. So here is my colleague, Brandon Wingfield, and he'll give you a brief explanation and a sample of the bot's functionality. Brandon?
So the start of the process, we get an Excel spreadsheet that's generated weekly. That spreadsheet contains information over just about all the vendors that we onboarded within the past week. Before the bot even really touches that spreadsheet, I go in and I remove our foreign vendors as well as any business entities. And then once that is done, I place the spreadsheet in a specific folder that allows the bot to read and review it. The bot will take that spreadsheet and compare it to a spreadsheet from the previous week to go ahead and just duplicate any, to eliminate any duplicate entries. And that way we don't get any error messages when we have to submit this to the Department of Accounts. Once that is done, the bot will pull the info from the spreadsheet and it will begin filling out the vendor maintenance request forms, as you can see it's doing now in the video. And then once that is done, it will also attach the W-9s to the respective forms, and then it will submit them for review and approval.
Okay, so where are we at now? So although I can't really, attach a cost savings to this, I can say it used to take us about 8 hours for Brandon to manually fill out this form, and that included, fixing all the human errors. Not saying that Brandon did a lot of human errors, but there are typographical errors, just sheer based upon the volume here. But we were able to reduce the time frame of actually running the bot from 8 hours to less than an hour. And this has to be done weekly. So 50 weeks out of the year, we run this bot process. So we did, after we rolled it into production, we did make a few tweaks to the application and fix some very small functionalities. And so I would say the bot is running very effectively. And so because of this, this has given us opportunities to use our labor resources in really other critical areas. So what's next for Mason? So I'm sure the other two departments that weren't picked are anxious to have their submitted proposals reviewed and possibly considered. And in addition, business services, our GMU's fiscal services has slated about 40 different processes that we believe that we can leverage and use the RPA process for. And overall, I couldn't tell you that we couldn't be happier with the process, and I can really see how this could benefit our department as well as the Mason community in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky and Brandon. I noticed some chat questions. Did any of them apply to George Mason?
Yeah, I can address that if you want me to,
Okay,
David.
why don't you do
Yeah,
that? 'Cause
just
it'll kinda
quickly,
keep-
Becky. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. We give everybody a chance to answer a question. So this is from Michael Asaro, and he was wondering if it takes an hour of labor to run the bot, or it takes an hour for the bot to run unattended, Becky. Thank you.
I would probably say, I mean, Brandon could correct me, but it probably only takes about 10 minutes of his. Because there's two different types of bots. You can either run them manned or unmanned. And because this particular bot had to run on a system that wasn't controlled by Mason, and that means we actually have to log into the Commonwealth of Virginia's web page. So this is actually what we call a manned bot. So once Brandon does his initial work of 5 or 10 minutes, then the bot takes approximately up to an hour, depending the size of the file, to complete the process. So I would say 5 to 10 minutes of Brandon's time, and the rest is just the bot's automation running.
Thank you, David. I think we can move to the next
Okay,
guest
so
speaker.
let's thank you guys very much. I think that's really insightful and useful. And as an economist, we always need to think about, to Becky's point, we are now able to use saved labor costs and apply it to higher value priorities of the institution, rather than, in this case, Brandon, like doing all this stuff. We maybe can apply his job and other people's jobs to really approaching how do we reward how do we establish greater student experiences at Mason, which I know we're really focused on. So let's take a moment to answer our poll survey question number 2, and then we'll be on with the webinar. Okay, let's go ahead and go to our next speaker, Eric Gold, who is the RPA program, University's Comptroller's Office at Virginia Commonwealth University. He has close to 20 years of experience leading ERP systems and has tremendous problem-solving skills. His practical approach towards managing business processes have all helped kickstart an RPA program at VCU. Thank you, Eric, for being with us, and welcome. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Eric Gold. I'm a senior IT project manager at VCU. And as part of the controller's office, I support payroll, procurement, grants and contracts, financial reporting, treasury, and the budget office. We started with our first robot in the grants and contracts area, really in post-award, and I'll give you a brief overview of how that robot works in just a minute. Just to bring you up to speed on our RPA initiative, we have 3 robots currently in production. We are wrapping up the development of another robot imminently, hopefully in the next week or 2. We're just wrapping up some final testing. We've got 2 more robots on our development pipeline that we're anxious to get started on. We're currently running 4 virtual machines, and we have 8 different robot user accounts. So we are also running UiPath Orchestrator in the cloud. So the first question that you might have is, why grants and contracts? Well, that's a really great question. At VCU, we've seen incredible growth over the last few years in our research world. And so sponsored research has reached $363 million in FY21. That represents a 25% increase over the previous 3 years. So you can understand why research is so important to us and why we needed a robot to help us. So the robot that we chose was for creating grants. And I'll give you a little bit more details about why we chose that process, but I want to also help you think from a big picture perspective. What kinds of things should you be thinking about when picking your process if you haven't gotten started with RPA, or if you have gotten started with RPA, how do you go about, what kinds of things do you need to be concerned about? So the first thing is make sure you pick the right one to start with. We surveyed all of our different areas and we thought about what different problem business processes do we want to solve. We chose something that wasn't the most difficult, but we chose something that could provide one of the greatest payoffs. And so we wanted to pick a process that we could gain some support from the organization. Again, we weren't trying to reduce FTEs, something that you've heard before from our other panelists, and David, you've spoken about as well. Both Becky as well at GMU was very, we're adamant that this isn't replacing people. That's not our goal. We're not a bunch of, healthcare companies or telephone companies that are just trying to automate everything and get rid of the people. One big concern that we spend a lot of time on, and I would recommend you spend as well, is on the governance, infrastructure, and security makeup of your RPA program. And the best way that you can get started with this is to rely on UiPath. They're the expert. They are the leading RPA software. At this point, we are relying on them as a partner, as well as any other partner that you might have for implementation, to be able to help address those governance, infrastructure, and security needs. So we spent a lot of time with our information security office to make sure that we were setting this process up for the future. So each robot has its own security, each process has its own robot and robotic account, and each department has its own virtual machine where its robots live and operate. The infrastructure needed was new for us. We decided to launch Orchestrator in the cloud. It was a brand new offering at that point, and we're super happy with it. It has performed exceptional for us, and we love the flexibility and the speed at which we were able to bring that up online. Something else to pay really close attention to before we kind of talk about our grant create process was to spend some time with data standardization and rule definition. What I mean is things that you've already heard a little bit more about from the other speakers, is that we can automate a lot of different things, but you've got to spend the time up front to design the process a little bit to work with that standard data. So if you don't necessarily have that formulation in place where your data always looks the same, you've got to form a way to get that data in that shape in order for the robot to take it and run with it. The rule definition is really important too, and you'll see that just really briefly as we talk about the Grants and Contracts Office. There's a lot of different flexibility when we're trying to replicate a very manual process. And so I'll show you one way that we've come up with it and how to deal with different scenarios. Let's take a look under the hood of our process just a little bit. And that way, I think it'll prompt you, if you're not familiar with how RPA works in great detail, just the thought process in terms of developing a robot. So for our solution, we have two sets of data. We've got a set of data from our Office of Sponsored Programs office. We've got a set of data from our Grants and Contracts office. And we want to put those two pieces of data together to actually create our grant and our ERP system. So we're getting a feed from OSP, and we're taking that. We needed a way to combine it with some manual data that's being created from the grant accountants. We can't necessarily formulate that data. We can't structure it in a way that we can use it for the robot without drawing some boundaries around it. So the way that we chose to do that was using the Google form. And when you operate a Google form, if you're not familiar, you also can have the ability to create a Google sheet in the background. And that's allowing us to standardize our data. And I'm not trying to get too technical here. We're just trying to give you a brief overview of kind of how it works. So the data that's created are things like, okay, well, what number do you want to call this grant, or what ID do you want to call it? And what types of information do I need, does the robot need in order to create this grant that cannot be provided by either a set of rules or from our other data source. And so we'll also see here that the robot reports back. You can see the status here on the ones that it was successfully able to create, or if it had a business error, it can explain what that error was so that we can hopefully resolve that and prevent it from future problems. So there's a fair amount of data here, but the robot's able to go and capture that data, and it puts it into a queue. And once it's loaded into the queue, we also have this rule sheet that's used by the robot. The rule sheet says, under certain conditions, I want this, oops, sorry about that. Under certain conditions, I want this to always be true. And so if a grant is either a federal grant or a state grant, then I always want the deferred account to be 2,450. If it's a local grant, then I want it to be 2,452. And so we're writing those rules and we're defining those. One of the reasons we do that is because they could change, but also now that we've written it once, we never have to ask the human, okay, human, what should the deferred account be anymore? We've already defined it. So the robot just goes and looks it up every time we need it. So let's see RPA in action just a little bit. And I've got a video that I'm going to share with you of what our robot looks like. And it's not incredibly exciting, but I'll let it run for you. So it's grabbing that Google Sheet and it's going to log into our ERP system. Something that one of the other speakers talked about was single sign-on. One way that we got around that single sign-on is that we worked with our information security officer to write a rule that allowed the robot not to have to sign in through single sign-on every single time. It's restricted already in the network, and so it's restricted to that machine through the VPN. And so that was one way that we don't have to update it every 14 days or every 60 days or whatever your local policy is. So as the robot's running, you're seeing it's filling on all the fields. So it's taking this information from the queue and then it's populating it inside the ERP system. I'm going to speed up just a little bit so you can see it's moving on through different screens. This process used to take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour per grant. We've created almost 300 grants with our robot now, and it now takes between 5 to less than 10 minutes for the robot to create that. So huge time savings there. And let's talk a little bit more about other things that are benefits here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this and we'll jump back over. Effectiveness and benefits. I want you guys to all think that dollars don't necessarily have to equal FTEs. And we've talked about that a few times. It really can be cost avoidance too. As we saw our research expenditures growing and our growth there, we really wanted to think about repurposing the talent. So the time that our folks are spending manually typing this into our ERP system, there's a lot of repetitive steps there. They type in grant numbers in the same date 8 different times on 10 different screens. And so by having the robot do it, now we can have the grant accountants and our specialists looking at scenarios that maybe they didn't have time to deep dive into before, finding problems. So any of those value-added services, customer service, problem solving, things like that, we really love to have them focus on those areas where a human can really add something. The other huge benefit, and other folks have talked about this too, is data accuracy and quality. No longer are we fat fingering things into the system when we're using it. A lot of downstream effects when you mistype a grant number, or when you go out and you start charging things to that grant and then realize that you've got to recreate it. So the big deal here is that we're also empowering citizen data scientists. This goes way beyond just RPA, but trying to give access to folks to be able to use the data for them to be able to make decisions about and to be able to kind of operate, the things that matter. So where to next? Like I mentioned, we're actively creating a lot more robots, sorry. We're actually creating a lot more grants with our robot as well. But we've increased complexity with each of the robots that we've built. So the robot that we have that we're getting ready to place into production is now interacting directly with our ERP database. So it's able to read criteria and check behind the robot. And we're just trying to be thoughtful and make it as robust as possible. We're also excited about sharing kind of the knowledge that we've got with other institutions. And so working together to try to automate lots of different pieces of what we do on a daily basis. Thank you so much for the opportunity, David. I'm going to pass it back over to you. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Eric. That was terrific. And thanks for your offer to share it with other institutions as well. Closing out our list of academic professionals is Marian Edwards, who joined Virginia State University, VSU, in August 2021 as the Chief Information Officer and Director of Technology Service. He came to VSU from the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, VITA. Welcome, Marion.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I will say that I was really expecting to be on the other side because I thought I would have more questions than I would have feedback on this, but this was actually good stuff. I will say, though, coming to the university and the experience with VITA, I did have exposure to the RPA, working with various agencies and seeing how they were leveraging the robots. But for me, when I heard about this, and Judy approached me, it was really interesting because to me, this is a very unique situation. And I wanted to see, one, when it comes to the academic world, we have a lot of the same systems. A lot of us are using Blackboard. A lot of us have to use Cardinal. And so to me, I see a lot of good situations. And I guess one of the questions that came to my mind is, could some of this work be shared? So, it wouldn't have to be a complete rewrite. And could there be some kind of repository so we could take that work and build off of it, kind of like, as a group, if we could have like some group together, so then we can leverage what others have built. And at the same time, we could pass on the lessons learned and, things of that nature, because, stepping into it as I work on updating my strategic plan, trying to figure out where does, the RPA here at the university. And so criteria stuff was great stuff, but how do we determine, what's a great use case? I definitely like the FTE aspect of it and reallocating the personnel, but what constitutes a good use case for RPA? What is that burden on administration? Of course, I'm CIO, so I'm speaking from an IT standpoint. What is that burden of administration on the RPA? Because what if something on Cardinal changes? How does that impact that bot? And how can we address that? And what are the potential impacts of those types of things? So I do think that if we can kind of get together, maybe form like a forum or group, something that we can actually grow together, I could definitely see some value in that. Definitely maybe a repository so folks can collaborate and look at some of the work that had already been done. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I know when we were talking about it, RPA earlier, maybe a week or two ago, you mentioned your focus on improving student experiences and what you guys are doing at VSU. Do you want to touch on that at all? Your passion for driving up student experiences, given what's happened with COVID, et cetera. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Okay, so as far as the student experience, that's one of the things that I told the board that's near and dear to my heart. I know that COVID it presented a lot of challenges here at the university, of course, going to that hybrid environment. I never would have thought in a million years to come up with a bot to check for activity on that. But, certain things went, and I know that we have been working with Blackboard on like the one-stop shop, this, that, or the other. But to me, it's the when the students want to go and check their data, that's one of the other things that I wanted to work in terms of their experience. But, how can we use a robot to ultimately make that interaction with the university and our administrative systems easier for the student? Can we do something that could, maybe save them some time and the administrators some time, to whereas maybe this could be data that we could present to them instead of actually having to call someone to actually get that information or to assist them. Things of that nature, are things that I would love to do to definitely address and actually improve on that student experience, things of that nature. Any interaction with the administrative side that can definitely save time for them and the interaction, if that makes sense.
That does. That's great. That's a great. And the idea of having, I don't know if it's a consortium, but having a place that all the Virginia schools, maybe other schools from around the country, sharing good information about what they're doing, I think would leverage everybody's abilities. And, we're always focused, at least I'm always focused in my teaching, on ensuring we keep costs as low as possible for higher education and provide as much value as we can to the students. And I think RPA is going to be instrumental in this in the future.
Right. And
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
you're
I'm
right.
sorry.
Since this is in the public space, I definitely think there's definitely a lot of value add to that, because we do save money on, I guess the prevention, a lot of rework on certain bots.
Absolutely.
Right, right. Well, thank you, Marion. Now we will have our final poll survey question, question 3. So maybe we can put that up, and please indicate your response. And this will mark the end of our survey questions. And thank you all for participating. And while people are kind of making their choices, we are now going to pivot a little bit and ask Keith McDaniel, Senior Representative of leading software automation company UiPath, to give us a 30,000-foot level analysis on the assorted programs using RPA around the nation, and talk about how higher education can leverage and overcome challenges and pop-ups around the implementation of automated solutions. Welcome, Keith, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Rare. I appreciate it very much, and the opportunity for all our speakers to be here with us today. It's been a pleasure, and a lot of great information being shared. I think what I'd like to do is start with something Marion said as it relates to what we can do in Virginia to share data, share information on automations that are being built. And traditionally, you could do a user group, and we can certainly support that. But I think another level of complexity to that is we have software that we can help provide that gives, it's called Automation Hub, and it allows a collaborative space. Traditionally, it's built for inter university or government agency. So it wouldn't be necessarily for a consortium like this, but we can absolutely apply it that way. And there's a couple things that he mentioned that are covered in that. The first thing is that you put KPIs in the software based on everyone's best practice, and it allows you to enter in from somebody from the organization, enter in an idea for automation, and it will actually give you a grade on whether it's something to start with, or if maybe there's an easier automation that you should do first or subsequently. So it has that kind of which should we start with, and grades out the different opportunities, which I know is helpful. The other thing it does, and he mentioned is, Marion mentioned that was very critical, is that things change, right? The automations have to be constantly updated to make sure, especially applications that are owned, like Cardinal. And the way the software automations are built, they're built in very small components. And so say that Cardinal login was one component of an automation. So then it can be used across every university in Virginia. And then if that one component is updated inside of Automation Hub, then it's automatically applied everywhere that component is called to be used in automations built by individual universities. So it's a great way to cut down on downtime when you do have changes in the environment. So thank you very much for that lead. And I think there's an opportunity for us to explore making Automation Hub available for the universities in Virginia to use as a collaborative tool to share automation components, and also to grade the value of automations within organizations. One last piece of one of the equations that we always talk about is security. And I thought it might be interesting to speak about at a high level what it means to bring automation to your university. What I have found is that from an RPA perspective, because we are mimicking human interaction on systems, for instance, Eric's using our cloud, our automation cloud at DCU, but none of their data sits in our cloud. The only information that sits in our cloud is the login information they require to log into it, and some metadata that's created from the interaction with the tool. And the Commonwealth has already deemed that data doesn't belong to them. So it alleviates a lot of the security concerns from a traditional SaaS perspective. Thus, all we do is work on your systems, log in as a user or through a user ID that's been provided, and act on your applications, on your network, moving your data from a system in your network, across your network, to a system on your network. So that's a great, from what I come from a cybersecurity background, and I found that it makes it a lot easier for universities to adopt. Not only does VCU use our cloud solution, I believe George Mason is on it as well. And we also have the Commonwealth of Virginia, VITA, offers a shared service based on our automation cloud for all the executive branch agencies. So if you have any questions about security or what it's going to mean when you bring this to your CISO or CIO to talk about implementation, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you.
There was
David,
a question in the chat that I think you may want to address. Somebody asked if UiPath has a sandbox environment for 30-day trials. The other thing that I want to make sure that people know about is that UiPath allows for training. That's something that they give away for free. That's not the case for some of the other RPA software that's out there.
Great, Eric, thank you for that. And I'll address that very quickly. So we offer absolutely a 90-day free trial of our automation cloud software. You just can go to uipath.com and search trial, pick the enterprise trial. The way we store the data is a little bit different. So there is a what we call a community trial that is for the masses, because we do want to train the world and the ability to build their own automations. But if all you need to do is select the enterprise option, and it'll give you 60 or 90 days of Orchestrator, which is the management app platform, and the availability to do some development work in our studio, and the bots to actually run those automations. So, and the reason we do that is so that you can get some experience with it, see how easy it is to get started, but then to also parent that with or partner that with our education component, so that you can go into the education format. I'm sorry, the name of skipping, but Academy, excuse me, UiPath Academy, so that you can use Academy, go through the lessons that are, whether you're a business analyst or a developer, you can go down those tracks and have the piece of software to do the work in.
And Keith, maybe I can ask you, can you talk about what other schools outside of Virginia maybe are using RPA for? Is it pretty much back office stuff, or is there all sorts of variety of applications that you've seen?
We see it across the board. I've seen it for working on offering scholarships from athletics. I've seen it used for every component of HR. There's a lot of part-time employment within universities due to the student employment and seasonal workers. And the onboarding and offboarding is complex and takes a lot of manual time. So many opportunities within HR can be automated, but just the pure onboarding and more importantly, offboarding. As we all know, there are, depending on what level you enter in a university, you have certain access to different things. So it's important from a security perspective that when someone's separated, that they're quickly removed from access to those systems. So that, for example, that's another opportunity for automation within the organization. Financial aid is another one. We had a university that in the community college system that was getting 1 million bad bots trying to sign up students that didn't exist, get qualified for financial aid, have the aid shipped out, and then the student never matriculated. So what happens then is the university is, once the student doesn't show up, the university has to pay back that grant money or loan money. And so it created a big issue for them. Hundreds of thousands of dollars was going out. So we were able to build an automation that helped them deplete that component of their financial aid delivery.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Keith. Let's go to questions and hear from you. So if you have some questions to the panelists, and first, thanks everybody very much. You all is very insightful. Let's take the viewers' questions, and maybe Dorian, if you don't mind, you can, if there are questions in chat box, we can read them off, or you could go to some questions that we have gotten.
Happy to do so, David. Thank you. I think we own our audience. Just before we do that, Eric's bot, I don't think that the video runs, so maybe we can take care of that quickly, and then in the remaining time we can address the questions. Eric, you want to do that? You ready?
Sure, I'll be happy to share my screen. Apologies.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So the robot is in the Google Sheet grabbing that information, and we're going to see it get started in the ERP system in just a second. You'll see it run through a few of the screens, and then I'll speed it up so you can see it moving on throughout those screens. So one of the things that has become a challenge for us is dealing with the ERP system's quirks, in that sometimes it takes a little bit longer to load and things like that. So we've got to use some tricks that are built into UiPath for looping and delays to be able to deal with those so that we can effectively create the items that we want to in our ERP system. So as you can see, the robot is filling those things in. It's able to copy and paste or to type, depending on how we set it up. It's also going to be able to navigate through these various tabs here. So I'll speed up just a second. You can see how it's skipping ahead. It's able to deal with errors and report those back to us as necessary. And we also have the robot generating emails to us once it's complete to inform us in a nice structured way of all the things that it created in the ERP for us. So if there's any other questions here, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to see it since it did not work earlier when I was trying to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and I hope everyone had the chance to do so. Again, please keep in mind that this session is going to be recorded. It will be available online, so you're having the chance to see it again, or you can reach out and connect with the guests here. Now, let's go to the questions in the remaining minutes that we have here. And there's one here for Becky and Brandon. And somehow you alluded to this, Becky, but maybe we can just repeat again or also add to it. What inspired you to look at software automation and for vendors? And were you able to reap any additional upsides like data manipulation, easy auditing, etc.? Thank you.
Well, I think it realized that we have 45 other projects that we can actually use. Because as you know, in the financial world, we are very data driven, and we have all different systems that we have to use. So to answer your question, I really feel like it has opened our eyes wide that we can adopt. I'm very technology driven. I mean, that's what I do. I do process automation. I bridge that gap between the functional side because I have a lot of functional knowledge and experience, and then I work with the IT folks to actually implement that. So having that uniqueness, I have the big picture that it's going to bring to us, not just cost savings, but we're talking about time savings and just really see how we can move forward business process wise in the future that can, gear us towards making it a better student experience. And instead of just being bogged down by, hey, we're a state agency of the Commonwealth of Virginia, there's bureaucracy involved. So eliminating some of that required bureaucracy and be able to actually spend our human time working on those experiences instead, I think is to me is where the real benefits are going to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Everybody needs better experiences. So thank you for doing that. Maybe Brandon, if you have anything to add, if not, we can move to the next question.
No, I think Becky pretty much.
Good. Cool. So we have one more here from one of our guests, David Litton. And I think this might be addressed to the previous the bot when you played it, Eric. Is the robot location specific for the variables that it is copying, or can it use the names besides the variable? Just in case the website is updated, does the bot detected that? I guess there are two questions in one here.
Sure. The robot is able to be changed if we need to update where things are located, and they're using variables that are defined. So if our ERP is updated or the location changes, we can move the field that we're replacing in that field. But part of the way that UiPath works is that we're able to locate something on the screen to be able to type into that field. And so we're able to use the variables that are coming out of our two inputs, and with the analysis that the robot's doing for us, then determine what is placed into that field for us. So not sure if that answers your question, David, but feel free to follow up if you have additional questions.
And we'll put at the end, as Caroline said, we'll put up everybody's contact information. So those of you who are watching can just go ahead and email the folks directly and ask your question so it's answered. Let me ask a question I have here, Dornan, to Eric as well. Looking back on the process, Eric, are there any kinds of communication things you did well or you should have done better to put people at ease? Because I find so many people are so nervous about, you're just going to put me through this and then fire me because you want to save money.
Great question, and something that I didn't speak to, but it was extremely important for us. When I say us, I mean the Office of Finance, but really my AVP, Trisha Perkins, was really important to her that she explained to all of the folks in our division that we weren't trying to replace them. We're trying to use robots to help assist our jobs and to make our lives easier, to allow us to do a better job at our job. I think that communication was delivered expertly, and I really would highly encourage you to do the same before going forward with an RPA program and even developing your first robot. Make sure that the goals of the program are clear to your constituents.
Well, that's great. And Keith, maybe I can ask you, following up on that question. Generally, have you seen like communication? I don't want to become a bureaucrat here, but communication plans that people roll out to educate staff on the use of software automation before they're actually implementing it, to kind of dispel any of these nasty negative comments about automation?
It's a great question. We actually have a couple different ways that we handle it. Yes, there is written communication that ends up going out, but what's more important is that it's communicated internally, right? From leaders, from folks that are trusted and have a place of authority, both position-wise and just trustworthiness within the organization. We recommend starting with 2 workshops. You start with the first workshop that aligns the business, and we help at our partners like Amplitude 9 help recognize from the leadership to the business owners down to the smaller part of the business, align that, have that conversation. This is why we're doing automation. This is why it's going to benefit you as an employee that's doing mundane, repetitive tasks that you don't want to do anyway. And that's the goal, is to improve your quality of work, not to replace you, but to give you more time to do more cognitive work. So that's the first workshop. The second, once you get that done and everybody starts to understand and starts to get excited, the second workshop is around identifying a discovery session to identify where to start and how to pick the top automations. And like we said, we generally recommend for that first workshop to target the low to medium complexity so that you get an early return of ROI on your investment and effort. And these types of automations don't take 18 months to implement like some of the big ERP projects you all have been a part of. These automations can be very light and be in production in 8 to 12 weeks, depending on what you pick. So those are the 2 workshops that we recommend to get started. And the very first one is around aligning the mission and helping the understanding of the automation mission be shared across the organization.
Great. And Dornan, do you have any more questions in the chat? Otherwise, we'll wind it up here.
It looks like we have someone raising their hand,
Oh,
Tracy
okay, I'm
Tucker.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to allow her to talk so she can ask her question. Tracy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I just had a question because I noticed that when Eric was doing his demo, he was showing how the bot was actually filling in the banner page. I was thinking, could something like a bot be used to help with like the quarterly upgrades that we do for banner, like all the regression testing for modules? Could the bot, be used to do the testing for us, to automate testing?
So Tracy, I think I'll take your question. Keith, if you've got any follow-up, I think that's an excellent point, Tracy. I've been trying to get Banner Illusion to listen to me, that they really should be using this, because it seems like with a lot of their releases, and I'm sure that you guys have seen this with lots of other software, we continue to have new things that are broken in every release. And so if they were using RPA to test their own software, they may find out when things are broken. Just to kind of further clarify a little bit, David asked a question earlier about if something changes, do you have to update the robot? And yes, they do change. And so we would need to go in and tell the robot, okay, this moved, a fraction of an inch to the left. It's a very quick thing to do, but we find that very easily running the test sequence through it as part of our quarterly upgrades. And so I think you make a great point there. It's something that we hope to build out with further processes, right? Because right now we're just testing that one process for grants. But as we build out other processes in the grants and contracts world or in financial reporting, we hope to automate a lot of the things that we do in our ERP system. And so that regression testing, the UAT testing, the quarterly upgrades should become a lot smoother for us. And it's really important that we test the robot through any upgrade.
Yep.
That's great. And Eric, I think I'll just highlight that. One of the reasons why Gartner has UiPath so highly rated is not because of the quality of our core RPA, which is a lot of what you've heard about today, but it's because of the breadth of the platform. And so we have the ability to do process mining and task mining to identify the automations and then build a framework for the automation for you. And then we use Automation Hub to collect those and share them across the organization. And then the core RPA is kind of in the middle where you develop and then run the bots, whether it be attended or unattended. But then at the end, we have a whole test suite that's built to not only test your automation platform, but your SAP, your Oracle environments, where you have other large software implementations and you're doing regular testing and regression testing. We have a suite that uses our software to develop those test automations for you. And then finally, we have analytics and insights so that you can have a really nice window into all of the value that the automation work that you've done, and gives a executive dashboard of the ROI for that mission of where you're at, and then also for what you've planned coming into the future. So all of those things that you think about in your software world and RPA vision, the platform is rounded out very nicely to help you get there.
And David, if I could add to Keith and what he's talking about, I mean, as far as his fantastic points, one of the things is a lot of people wonder where to get started. And, in the higher education system and in government, there's a lot of use cases that you could start very quickly where there's already been bots developed, whether it's FOIA redaction or talking about grants compliance with GIPRA or other types of regulatory compliance types of activities. Things that where there's backlogs of it because of COVID and other issues, related to being able to address backlogs of work. Those are very easy to really get started with, and there's already been a precedent to develop those bots. So we find it that it's very, very much a nice pathway to get started with use cases that have already been established in higher education as success, and ROI has already been proven, and really get started with a number of those bots and then scale from there.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. It really reduces risk or risk uncertainty if you're basically replicating what others have done and done successfully. Are there any other questions? I want to be sure we keep to our commitment to get people on and off.
No, I think we're ready at the top of the hour. We want to be respectful of our audience this time, and also of our guests. So it seems like the automation movement and the student experiences and the future of education trend is in good hands. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very much for being with us today. We are proud of our Virginia schools and how all of us are leveraging innovation to improve student experiences and increase the efficiency of institutions. I'm going to turn it over to Caroline, who will share some final thoughts and give you guys the email addresses of the attendees.
Thank you, David. And thank you to everyone, audience and speakers included, for taking time to be with us today.